You've created an awesome coloring book for KDP and you even have a pretty nice cover image, but you feel the title design is a little lacking. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create titles that grab a potential customer's attention. You'll see 3 examples of titles, and best of all, you'll know exactly how to create your own designs going forward. I'll be using Affinity Designer, but these techniques should work in pretty much anything, so let's jump into it. So one of the first things we're going to do is look at how to get good fonts. And a site I really like is Creative Fabrica. So what you can do here is you can search for something like children's book. And if you click on the left over to fonts, it'll filter just the fonts that they have. And there's tons of options here. And I search for children's book, but you can search for anything that is related to the topic of your book, like animals or flowers or whatever. And if you scroll down, you just see that they have tons of options here, so many that it can be overwhelming at times. Now I found 3 fonts that I like, and I'm going to use them as examples in this video. One is called Horror World here, which could be cool for a lot of kind of Halloween books or maybe some type of goth kawaii things. Comic Hero is another one, looks quite interesting. And Vintage Rumble. So to get the fonts, you just of course click download, and then they'll be downloaded to your computer. I'll just put it on my desktop for now. And when you extract it, you can go and it'll give you the font files. I like OTF, so I just install that one. And you install it. And I'll do that for the other 2 fonts. Now that I've installed the fonts, I'm going to open Affinity Designer on my computer, just so we have a workspace where we can start creating our title. And I'm not going to upgrade right now. I'll create a document, and I'll just make it 8.5 by 11. Again, the size doesn't really matter because your logo, you're going to export it and put it in other places. So you can just create whatever you're comfortable with for the moment. So the first font I want to work with is this Horror World font, which I kind of liked. Here's a pro tip, and it's how I'm going to proceed through the rest of the video. If you really want to learn how to use a font, one of the best ways is to try to copy the image in the font's thumbnail. It gives you a really great idea of how to basically use the font. And then going forward for your own book, you can obviously change the text to be what you need for your title, but also you can play with the colors and the arrangement. So let's do that now. So we're going to look at the Horror World example. So here they show some pretty cool examples of how to use their fonts. We can kind of go through it and see the different examples they have. Let's take this basic one here. I'm going to copy the image. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it in my Affinity Designer document. Okay. Now I installed the Horror World text, so let's see what it looks like. I'll just say Horror World. Horror World. And when you install the font, you can go to the drop down here and you can type it in the search box and it will show up. So as you can see, the font by itself doesn't look terribly inspiring. There's also another subtle difference here, which you may notice when you work with certain fonts. If you look at the example, look at the R's here, and look how one R is different than another. This is because for some fonts, lowercase and uppercase will look dramatically different. So I typed this in, that's lowercase. So let's see if I make this uppercase. So I can get the 2 R's to look different also. What else looks different? The O looks different. It's a lowercase O actually. You can see the 2 O's look different. The R in the N at the end. Now you don't have to match it exactly, it's just kind of a choice, but it's something you may notice when things don't look exactly the same. Sometimes it'll give you error warnings about spelling if you have misaligned case. Okay, so clearly our font here isn't as inspiring as the source image, so let's start building it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first put a background that's a little more similar to the thumbnail image. So I'll do the eyedropper and let's go like around here, okay? So let's actually examine this font and see like what are they doing here. So if we zoom in, and it's a little blurry because that's the maximum of the resolution, but let's kind of analyze what's going on here. What I see here when I look at this is, first thing I notice obviously is there's this kind of texture inside the letters that kind of gives it this grungy effect. Then if you look closely, you can see once you get outside of the letter, there's a white border, all right? Now we have a dark blue border and a lighter blue border. I also notice there's a subtle drop shadow around the edges here. So really observing these kind of subtle differences is something that's going to help you look at these types of designs and bring it into your own design. So let's go and see, like, how can we start to recreate this? Now the texture, I'm going to worry about that at the end, but for the moment I will just make our text the same as perhaps this top color here. So let's go, I'll sample from there. And there we have it. Next, what I'll do is I'll start targeting this white outline. Now, when you have something outlined, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do a stroke or you can do the outline effect. Both of these are the same thing, so I'm going to group them over here on the layers panel, and I'm going to apply the effects to both of them. So let's start with the outline, because I think that might be a little more promising here. Now, of course, it's black, so let's make it white. It's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see it in there. Now what you can do is you can add another outline by clicking this plus button here. And I'll make it some ridiculous color so it shows up more obviously. Now we can use this to be our dark blue color. So what I'll do is I'll double click my obnoxious green here and I'll select the navy blue. And it outlined it there. Now it's a little hard to see because it's with the dark blue background, but we'll add another outline. And this time we'll do, let's make it just green again so we can see it. Now we'll do our lighter blue. So right away you can see we're already getting a little bit better of an effect. Now it's still not quite there because the main thing that's missing is this internal texture. So there are a couple ways to get this splatter effect. I'm going to use the pixel persona and actually just draw with a brush to get that effect. So I'm going to click over here to pixel and I'll create a new pixel layer. So I'm going to go to my brushes and there's a sprays and splatters section that sounds pretty promising. So let's click that. Let's see what it looks like. I'll switch the color to what it should be there. So it seems like this one would actually be pretty good. So let's kind of like just go back and forth and get kind of a build up there. Now, of course, this is going to be a pixel layer, so it might not scale up to the best resolution, but for our purposes, it'll be good enough. So what I'm going to do is I made this splatter texture, so now I'm going to drag it into one of the words. We'll start with horror. I'll go back to my designer persona. And if I compress it, you can see we kind of have that effect of the purple splatter texture there. And I can also duplicate this and add it to my other word. And you can adjust it as you like. I'm not totally satisfied with the design yet. It seems like the white lines are being a little too strong compared to our reference image. So let's see if we can fix that. First, I'm going to change the letters to actually be what they are up top, so I know that I'm looking at the same thing. So I can see, let's see, this R is actually different. This L is different. I think the D is the same. And I think the other letters are the same. So I think what I'm actually going to try is I think I'm going to take the white outline off and see if it looks different as a stroke. So let's go to our effects. So we have this white outline. Let's turn it off. And what happens if instead we add a white stroke? I think that looks a little bit better. And sometimes when you do these types of things, the difference between an outline and a stroke is kind of subtle. They each have different features, but I recommend trying different ones and seeing which one looks better. So from my perspective, it doesn't look exactly the same. We don't know what program they've used to do this stuff in, but I think it's a pretty close replica of how to actually use this font effectively. And this is something you could change to put on your book. This is completely editable, so instead of Horror World, let's say you wanted something different. Let's say your book is about a haunted house, so you want haunted, and you do house. Very easy to edit. And you can drag the words around to fit your composition the best. Now, this is a good example of something that might happen. You'll see when I move this over the top words, the boundaries kind of disappear. And that is because the outline effects are taking effect for the whole group that I have this in. These things are grouped here. If you want to change that, what you can do is I'll move house to its own group. So I'll separate these. I'll just copy these. And from the top one, I'll delete haunted. I'll delete house. From the bottom one, I'll delete haunted. Now I can actually have one overlap the other, and I'll bring it to the front. So this is a stylistic choice. You can decide how you want these words to interact with each other. Okay, now let's look at another font. This one was called Vintage Rumble. It has a very kind of cute, bubbly look to it. I've created a new document in Affinity Designer, same as the last one, just 8.5 by 11. Doesn't really matter. Let's copy this image for our reference, and I'll paste it in here. And let's get a quick example of our font. So as you can see by themselves, it still looks kind of plain. And our target example has all capitals, so I'll do all capitals here. Now, one thing I'll do quickly is, again, I'll make a background that kind of matches our thumbnail background, which is really pink. Very pink. And there we go. I'll make Vintage Rumble text white. And that's our basis for starting. So let's again kind of analyze the example here and see what have they done. Well, they have this internal text which goes from blue, kind of cyan, white, and yellow. We'll save that to the end. That looks like a pretty easy part. The thick kind of red text in the background, it seems to be offset. So I think we're going to have to copy the text, put it behind it, and kind of blow it up a little bit and put it slightly askew. So let's see how that looks. I'll group this here. And let's create a new group. So our group in the back, I'll grab some of that color. And if we offset it like that, we can see it's starting to take effect there. Now, the text in the back is, of course, very much expanded. So what options do we have for that? Well, I think we can go to our old friend outline again. And let's see what happens if we boost it up a bit. Now it's black. Let's change the color to our red. I think we're pretty close to the basic effect that's going on there. Let's see if I can add a thick border. Maybe that'll help puff it up a little bit. So something I just noticed is that if you look at the letters themselves, I think they are outlined in this red background also. So let's give these letters a stroke. Selected the letters, I'll give them that. And let's make it thicker. Now the stroke seems to be going inwards. Let's put it on the outside because it seems like they have more space on the interior there. Yeah, I think that's starting to look pretty comparable. I think that's relatively close to what I would call the same. They may be using some other effects here to like bump out the text, but we'll go with this. And now, of course, there's this additional white outline. So let's go here, add another white outline. And here we have a problem. So apparently that didn't work. So let's undo that. Now I think if we group these two groups together, let's try putting an outline on all of it. And yeah, that seems to probably be closer to what's happening in the example. So everything is being outlined. So what I did is I grouped the groups together. So we have our red background, our white foreground, and then I grouped them together. So now when I add a white outline to that whole group, you're seeing the whole group be outlined here. I'll go and touch up this a little bit. Let's see if now that we've done that, if doing this has any additional change. There we go. I'll leave it there for now. And last but not least, let's add a drop shadow to this whole group. So go to FX, outer shadow, and that looks like a pretty good shadow. Of course, the color isn't black. We want it to be something else. Let's choose that. something that's more colorful. And we could boost the intensity to get closer to the effect. I think that's fairly close there. And for the finishing touch, we'll color the letters in. So these 3 letters were that blue, and then these 3 letters were yellow. And it looks like I missed a T. Big mistake there. Now in a case like this, what I might do is you can do some touch-ups. So these are kind of specific things that if your lines or the fills aren't looking exactly how you want them to, you might need to like add a little bit of special details to make it look better. So for example, maybe this text is perfectly lined up, but I don't like this little white part here, and I don't like, maybe that is a little too small to be significant. So I want to kind of get rid of those. Here's another example. So in this case, literally what I would do is I would just draw a circle. And I would just put it over that text. I mean, sometimes there's just little hacks like this that just are the easiest way to get through things. So I'll cover that up. See what else I want to cover up. Maybe I want to cover up this one. Maybe I want to cover up that one. So again, not the most major thing, but again, if there's some little thing that's just bothering you in your layout, don't feel bad about just making a little cover up or a little patch to fix it real quick. And I think that's basically it for this one. It just shows you how you can take a simple font and with a few outlines and some drop shadows, make it look a little more complex and a little more interesting for the viewer. And now our final example, this font called Comic Hero, which looks really cool if you're doing a comic book or something like that. Let's look at it kind of closely and see what we notice here. So I'm guessing the font probably has some type of outline effect, and it looks like they just copied the front and put it behind and just offset it a little bit. So this one looks fairly simple. I am noticing there's an obvious gradient in the color for the text, but there's also a subtle texture here. It looks like, it's hard to say because it's kind of low resolution, but we'll see how we can add some type of texture there. So let's get started. I wrote some text here already, and let's put it in. Looks like our example is all caps. So I'm noticing this H is bigger, and the same thing with the C, and the spacing is definitely a thing. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think this one I'm actually going to separate the letters individually, and I'm just going to go for it because this is our title. We can spend some more time on it. So let's say comic. We're just going to do it by letter by letter. Okay, so I've just made the letters actually separate so we can kind of manually do it ourselves. Let's get them kind of in the ballpark area. Yeah, this one's interesting because I just noticed the R is overlapping the E there. So that's another detail. So let's just get everything kind of lined up. We'll do equal spacing to start, and then we'll work from there. So if I tilt it a little bit. Okay, so I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a backup copy here. I'm anticipating that this is going to be used for the back shadow later. Let's see what this actually looks like when we add a border to it. Let's see, do we want to add a stroke or an outline? I'm going to do a gradient to start also. So it looks like the outline is a little bit thicker. So let's start working a little bit on the position of the letters here. So let's kind of do that. I think we basically got that there. It's a little trick I do to just make sure things line up correctly. I'm sure there's rulers and all that kind of stuff you can use too, but it's the way I like to do it. Now the question is, will this be as easy as just copying it and making it black and putting it behind it? So we're getting some kind of a little bit of an effect there I don't like. Let's do this. I'm going to group things just to make it a little easier. Group. Bring this to the front, back. And is this going to look good by default? I think we need to make it a little thicker. So I think it looks generally close. I think we can do a little bit of altering of the spacing of the letters, but for the most part, I think it's there. To do that, all you just do is select the shadow and the letter itself. So the C and the O are touching, so we'll make them touch there. And this is another example where I might just even, like, if I was fixing this, I would just add a little patch there or something if it didn't look decent. Okay, so I think this one's looking pretty good. So I did mention the texture earlier on. Let's see if we can actually do something with that. So it's supposed to be a comic book, so maybe it's some type of paper texture. So what would I do if I wanted to do that? Well, of course, I'd go back to Creative Fabrica. So I'll search for something like old paper. That's kind of one I often look at. This one looks kind of interesting. Old paper texture. Let's give it a shot. So placing textures within a text shape is usually pretty easy. I'll give you an example of how we usually do it. I can make some text here. I'll just call it Comic Hero. And let's import one of the textures I made. For some reason the filter goes to all text files. I don't know why. And let's do this one. So usually you can just take it and drag it right into the text and it will fit the shape. And you can do different modes. You can do multiply and you can see the textures having an effect there. You can do color. Color burn is a good one. All these different effects. But one of the downsides of the method we did, which was break up the letters separately, is that I believe there's not an easy way to do that unless we just merge all the shapes together. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to take all of our letters and I'm going to merge them. So if you do convert to curves, and I'm going to add them all together. So now we just have basically one shape. And we did lose our gradient, so let me fix that real quick. Okay, I think that mostly looks like it. And what I'll do now is I'll add the paper into those curves. And if you zoom in, you can kind of see the texture there. It's a little subtle. Actually, the image is so big. Let me make it smaller. So you can kind of see some of the grittiness there. It's subtle, but I wonder if I double it, what will happen. Yeah, if I double it, now you can really see it. And you can kind of play with the filters here to see which ones look good. Soft light looks kind of cool. You know, it's up to you to decide which one you like the best, but that's basically how you would add some texture to this. And again, this is one where we kind of specifically laid out the letters in a very precise manner. But because this is our title text and it's probably not going to change, you know, we have the freedom to do that. It's not like this is something that has to be edited a lot. But it's quite flexible. I mean, it's all vector. It's very scalable. So with that, I think we'll call Comic Hero done. So there you have it. We went through 3 examples of creating a cool title for a coloring book. And you can see the methods we used are really about getting inspiration from the font thumbnail itself. You know, let the designer show you how to use it in the best way possible. Usually the techniques aren't that hard. It's kind of just outline, drop shadow, maybe a couple other tricks with some textures. And then once you do that, you can go and you can modify it to do different colors as you like. It's quite easy. So I hope the methods in this video really help upgrade your graphic design skills for creating titles. There's not really a huge mystery behind it. And this will also allow your books to stand out even more on the Amazon marketplace. So if you learned anything in this video, be sure to give it a like and see you in the next video.